Russia's insane attack on Ukrainian government building leaves nearly 50 casualties. September 6, 2025. The peaceful night sky of Kyiv is suddenly torn apart. Russia has launched the largest airstrike of the war. 810 drones, 4 ballistic missiles, and 9 cruise missiles hurtling toward Ukrainian cities. But could hundreds of millions of dollars worth of firepower really crush a country that had been at war for more than 3 years? In just a few minutes, the world had its answer. Ukraine's air defenses roared into action. More than 700 drones were shot down, but 54 drones and 9 missiles penetrated, striking across the country. For the first time, a government building in Kyiv was destroyed. Russia celebrated its victory, but little did they know that Ukraine had planned devastating retaliation. 320 new-generation UAVs made by Ukrainian engineers, along with 58 tanks and 3 ballistic missiles, angrily rushed into the Russian base in a consistent formation. So what will happen next? Will Ukrainian drones, tanks, and missiles be able to penetrate the most fortified Russian fortress? And what will be the damage to both Ukraine and Russia? Let me show you all. At 23:45 on September 6, 2025, the skies above Kyiv and other major Ukrainian cities lit up with what would become the largest Russian aerial assault of the entire war. Radar screens filled with hundreds of fast-moving targets. Within minutes, 810 drones surged toward Ukrainian airspace, accompanied by 4 ballistic missiles and 9 cruise missiles launched from both land and sea. It was a storm of steel and fire designed to cripple Ukraine's defenses in a single night. Ukraine's air defense network, bolstered by Western-supplied Patriot systems, German Iris-T batteries, and dozens of mobile anti-air units, responded with unprecedented intensity. Operators fired more than 1,200 interceptor missiles in less than 2 hours. The night sky became a deadly dance of tracers, explosions, and falling debris. By dawn, over 700 drones had been destroyed mid-air, scattering twisted fragments across fields and city streets. Yet despite this heroic defense, 54 drones and 9 missiles broke through. Kyiv suffered the unthinkable. For the first time since the beginning of the war, a government ministry building in the capital was directly hit. Windows shattered across a 4-block radius, alarms wailed, and smoke poured into the night sky. Across Ukraine, the strikes killed 4 civilians and left 44 more wounded, some critically. Emergency crews pulled survivors from the rubble well into the morning hours. The scale of the attack stunned the nation. General Oleksandr Pavlyuk, commander of Ukraine's ground forces, addressed reporters with a mix of outrage and defiance. Russia has shown once again that it has no regard for human life. Launching more than 800 drones in a single night is not warfare. It is terrorism at an industrial scale. But every strike only strengthens our resolve to fight back. The general's words echoed the mood of a country bloodied but unbroken. The barrage that was meant to shatter Ukraine instead ignited its determination. In the shadows of ruined buildings, the Ukrainian High Command quietly began preparing a counterstrike, one that would catch Russia completely off guard. If you were the top leader of Ukraine, would you retaliate immediately with everything you had? Let me see what their plan is. By the morning of September 7, 2025, inside a heavily guarded command bunker in Kyiv, Ukrainian generals had finalized their plan for retaliation, dubbed Operation Black Dawn. The target? A vast Russian military base in the previously occupied Donetsk region of Ukraine, housing more than 4,000 troops, 120 tanks, and fuel and missile depots intended for a new offensive into Ukraine. Its destruction would paralyze Moscow's offensive for months. The plan was breathtaking in scale. Ukraine would unleash 320 improvised attack drones, built from scavenged electronics, carbon fiber frames, and small explosive charges. Of these, 50 drones were fitted with advanced cameras for real-time reconnaissance, feeding coordinates back to headquarters. Another 50 drones carried electronic warfare pods designed to blind Russia's vaunted S-400 and Panzer S-1 air defenses, turning billion-dollar systems into useless metal. Once the radars were jammed, the remaining 220 strike drones would swarm the base, overwhelming defenses in a single devastating wave. But this was only the opening act. Following the drone strike, 58 Ukrainian tanks, a mix of T-64 BVS and German Leopard 2s, would surge forward in a shock maneuver designed to shatter Russian armored lines. Finally, to seal the fate of the base, Ukraine prepared to launch 3 Grom-2 ballistic missiles, each capable of obliterating hardened command bunkers with pinpoint accuracy. However, a dangerous incident occurred. Just hours before launch, one of the drone control stations shut down due to a faulty power module. For 3 crucial minutes, the entire reconnaissance phase seemed to collapse, potentially exposing Ukraine's retaliation plan. Immediately, technicians had to urgently reroute the systems via a backup generator hidden in a tractor. Fortunately, thanks to their quick thinking, the station was back up and running, saving the mission. What could have been a humiliating disaster became a reminder. Ukraine's survival depends not on perfection, but on resilience. Each mistake corrected, each weakness patched, brought them one step closer to a full-scale counterattack. Before you enter the heart of this war, support us by liking and subscribing to the channel. Now join me in witnessing the surprise of the future. At 3:15 on September 8, 2025, the first wave of Ukrainian drones crossed into Russian-occupied Donetsk airspace. 50 reconnaissance UAVs flew low, weaving through valleys and tree lines, transmitting live video feeds to Kyiv. Their cameras revealed the sheer scale of the target. Over 4,000 Russian troops encamped across 12 square kilometers, 120 armored vehicles positioned in neat rows, and fuel depots the size of football fields. Moments later, the 50 jamming drones activated. Their transmitters poured white noise into Russian radar frequencies. The mighty S-400 batteries, worth more than $500 million each, blinked red as their screens dissolved into static. Operators shouted in confusion as targeting locks vanished. Still, Russia did not give up easily. Within minutes, Russian forces unleashed a desperate counterattack. 2 Panzer S-1 systems managed to visually spot incoming drones and fired off 24 missiles in less than 90 seconds. Explosions lit up the night sky, tearing apart nearly 30 Ukrainian drones before they reached striking distance. Russian machine gunners scrambled onto rooftops, spraying the sky with tracer fire. At one fuel depot, soldiers lined up with heavy machine guns, cutting down wave after wave of buzzing machines. But the swarm was too big. 220 Ukrainian attack drones swooped down, overwhelming the defenses with sheer numbers. Even as dozens were shot to pieces, the rest found their targets. A 2 million-liter fuel depot burst into flames, setting off secondary explosions. Ammunition bunkers began to burn, detonating in a chain of violent secondary explosions. The ground shook like an earthquake as 15 artillery positions were wiped out in less than 5 minutes. However, Ukraine also suffered damage, but not significantly. Of the 320 drones launched, nearly 90 were destroyed or jammed mid-flight, total damage estimated at around $270,000. For a brief moment, commanders feared that Russian resistance might hold out long enough for reinforcements to arrive, but that did not happen. 5 drones crashed into 5 different radar vehicles, detonating their warheads and engulfing half of the radar system. With the defenses collapsing, panic spread among Russian troops. Flames illuminated the night as soldiers abandoned their posts, running through smoke and shrapnel. Ukrainian operators watched the live feeds in grim silence. The plan was working. Still, this was only the first stage. The drones had cracked open Russia's shield, but the battle was far from over. The next strike would come not from the skies, but from the rumble of steel treads advancing through the dawn. Are you still there? Don't leave yet. Here's the real destruction of this base. At 5 a.m. on September 8, 2025, as the burning Russian base lit up the night sky behind them, the ground began to tremble. From concealed positions west of Donetsk, 58 Ukrainian tanks, a mix of aging but reliable T-64 BVS and cutting-edge Leopard 2A6S, rolled forward in a formation unlike anything Russia had seen in the war. Instead of advancing in long columns, they surged in 5 staggered waves, each wave firing in synchronized volleys designed to tear apart Russian armor before it could even maneuver. Russian forces, already reeling from the drone inferno, scrambled to respond. 30 T-72 B3s and T-90 tanks tried to form a defensive line on open ground, their turrets swiveling toward the advancing Ukrainians. For the first 10 minutes, the battlefield erupted in thunderous exchanges. Shells screamed through the air at speeds exceeding 1,500 meters per second, striking with the force of a small earthquake. The initial engagement was brutal. A Leopard 2 scored a direct hit on a T-90, igniting the ammunition compartment and throwing the turret 18 meters into the air. But the Ukrainian tanks were not spared. Within minutes, 6 T-64s were under Russian fire, their crews forced to take cover as flames engulfed the wreckage. Then came the decisive maneuver. Ukrainian commanders ordered the second wave to fire simultaneous cross-shots across overlapping arcs. The tactic confused Russian gunners, who suddenly found shells tearing into their flanks instead of their fronts. In less than 20 minutes, 17 Russian tanks were destroyed or disabled. Survivors abandoned their machines, fleeing on foot toward what remained of the base. At 6:30 a.m. on September 8, 2025, the battlefield west of Donetsk was already a vision of hell. Russian tanks smoldered in twisted heaps, their ammunition still cooking off in violent pops. Ukrainian armor stood victorious on captured ground, their turrets scanning the horizon for the next threat. But in Kyiv's underground command center, generals knew the operation was not yet complete. The most decisive strike was still to come. 3 Grom-2 ballistic missiles, Ukraine's pride in homegrown rocketry, sat poised for launch. Each carried a warhead weighing nearly 1,000 kilograms, capable of obliterating reinforced bunkers. At precisely 6:32, the order was given. Columns of fire erupted from launch sites deep inside central Ukraine, and the missiles tore into the sky at Mach 5, leaving glowing trails across the early morning haze. Russian radar stations, already crippled by drone strikes, detected them too late. Within minutes, the missiles arced downward over Donetsk, their re-entry flames painting streaks of fire across the horizon. The first slammed into the base's command headquarters, collapsing concrete walls reinforced with steel beams. The second obliterated an underground fuel depot, igniting what remained of over 1 million liters of aviation fuel. The third struck a cluster of barracks where hundreds of soldiers had taken shelter after abandoning the front line. The impact was apocalyptic. A shockwave ripped outward, flattening structures within a 1-kilometer radius. Secondary explosions erupted for more than 2 hours as ammunition stores detonated in brutal succession. Witnesses in nearby towns reported windows shattering 20 kilometers away, and the plume of black smoke rose so high it was visible from across the border. By the time the fires died down, the scale of destruction was undeniable. Ukrainian intelligence estimated over 600 Russian soldiers killed or wounded, dozens of tanks reduced to molten husks, and entire artillery battalions erased from the order of battle. What was once a staging ground for Moscow's next offensive had become nothing more than scorched earth. For Ukraine, the operation was a triumph of resilience and ingenuity. Against overwhelming odds, they had turned scrap-built drones, aging tanks, and a handful of missiles into one of the most devastating counterstrikes of the war. For Russia, it was a catastrophe. A single night that cost them men, machines, and the illusion of control. The message was clear. Every act of terror against Ukraine would be repaid in fire. As the smoke cleared over Donetsk on the morning of September 8, 2025, Ukraine's counterstrike stood as one of the most daring operations of the war. From 320 scrap-built drones to 58 tanks, to the final salvo of 3 Grom-2 ballistic missiles, the plan had unfolded like clockwork, though not without moments of near disaster. In the end, it left behind a Russian base reduced to rubble, hundreds of soldiers lost, and a clear message etched into the battlefield: Ukraine would not be broken. For Americans watching from afar, this story carries weight beyond military numbers. It is a reminder of how ingenuity, courage, and resolve can turn weakness into strength. Ukraine did not rely solely on billion-dollar systems. It improvised with homemade drones and patched-up power units, proving that determination can level the playing field against a larger foe. The lesson is timeless. Wars are not won by machines alone, but by the will of free people refusing to surrender. This echoes America's own history. From the Revolution, where militias stood against the greatest empire of the age, to World War II, when industry and resolve transformed the nation into an arsenal of democracy. Ukraine's fight today is a test of that same principle. It shows what happens when tyranny underestimates the human spirit. For U.S. veterans and citizens alike, it offers both a warning and an inspiration. Never take freedom for granted, and never doubt the power of those willing to defend it. As one Ukrainian officer said after the strike, "We are not just fighting for land. We are fighting for the right to live free, and that is worth any price." To our viewers, the value of this story lies in its clarity. It reminds us that freedom is fragile, vigilance is essential, and allies who stand firm can change the course of history. Ukraine's retaliation was more than a battle. It was a statement to the world. Aggression will be met with resistance, and resistance, if fueled by resolve, can burn brighter than any missile. Freedom isn't free, and neither is honest analysis. Stand with us by subscribing, sharing this video, and helping our voice reach more Americans.